There's different types of ground when you hear the word ground. This is really practically useful when you're trying to interconnect a couple pieces of gear. Let's say you play in a band and you've got a keyboard and an amp and some foot pedals. You're connecting pieces of gear together, and if there's buzzes and noises, a lot of it comes from grounding problems. Ground is supposed to be zero potential, 0 volts. Like if you hold on to a water pipe, that's totally ground. There's no potential voltage there at all. Signal ground is a little different, and that's really where the signal coming in and going out uses it as its reference point for the signal. Chassis ground is usually tied to earth, and chassis ground, when I say chassis, I mean the outer case that the equipment's sitting in. Like your refrigerator. The outside of a refrigerator is the chassis, and that's usually connected to the third pin ground that goes into the wall, and that's totally ground, and it's there for a reason. It's there so that if by chance anything on the inside of the refrigerator leaks some voltage onto the chassis or the outside of the refrigerator, you can't get shocked because it just drains off to ground, and it's a safety mechanism. It has nothing to do with signal ground. It has to do with safety ground. Earth ground is what's represented by a stake into the ground, and that's it. That's totally ground. So there's 3 different grounds. And for example, in my recording studio, I've got a bunch of different grounds going on because I've got pieces of gear, I've got compressors and microphone mic pre's and EQs and outboard gear sitting in a rack. I've got my recording console, I've got my amps and my speakers, and I also, on the outside of the studio, took a piece of rebar that was 6 feet long and drove it into the ground with a sledgehammer and clamped a clamp on it that I screwed down onto the steel rebar that's in the ground, and took a really thick green wire to come into the studio to connect it to my recording console. So the chassis of my recording console is really anchored to ground.